So yes, as the title says, I have gotten rid of a couple of snakes, and I'm going to tell you why that is. That's something that I thought I would never do, and there's a story to go along with it, so we'll get into that in a second. But first, welcome back to another video. Man, it has been such a long time since I've done a video, and I don't do these very regularly. So I'm glad that you've tuned in, and thank you for sticking around. We are also gonna do a reptile room tour, which I don't think I've ever done one on this channel. Or maybe I have one years and years ago. It's just something that I don't normally do. So anyway, we're gonna do that as well. And of course, I'll tell you the story of why I got rid of a couple of snakes and where they went. So if you have been listening to the podcast, you know that I've had a few changes recently. One, I moved a couple of months ago, and we also had another baby back in the spring. So life has been super busy, and plus my work changed a little bit, and that's kind of relevant to why we had to get rid of a couple of snakes. I'll talk about that in a second. For those of you who consistently watch the podcast, you know that things have slowed down. My plan is to ramp up the show again and ramp up this channel again, kind of into the new year. I have lots of new things planned, or lots of new guests planned that I'm very excited about, but I did need some downtime to kind of reset everything. And I actually discuss my future plans with the podcast, as well as just the reptile room in general, over on the Expert and the Idiot podcast with Adam. I believe that episode won't be out until early January, but I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time in this video talking about future plans. But if you're curious about my background and more about personal stories, as well as the plans for the podcast and the room, go listen to that. Go subscribe to his channel so you don't miss that episode when it does come out, because I go into way more detail there. Okay, so first, let's rip around the room and see what we have. So let's start down here on the bottom enclosure. On the left side of my rack system here, we have a 6 foot by 3 foot tall by 2 foot wide enclosure, and it is now housing my male jungle carpet python, as you can see up there. So all of these enclosures were just redone, I think, last week. So I've just freshly painted everything and actually planted some new fresh grass seed, which maybe I'll talk about in a second. I know some of you are interested in the grass, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But here's the enclosure. We have a sky hide here and a humid hide here, which I kind of disguise with this oak bark pasted above. Let's get a shot of the animal. So that's him. He is a 2018 baby. So what is that, 7, 8 years old now? I guess just over 7 and a half. And I mean, he's gorgeous as ever. Every time he sheds, he gets a little more yellow, a little more black, a little bit feisty as he gets older. He's been, not the easiest snake to move around, but I mean, how can you complain about that? And there's another sky hide up here. It's basically a flower pot or a plant pot that I've disguised with some cork bark to give him some shelter. And then the bottom, obviously thick layer of substrate, a couple of hides, and a bunch of leaf litter. This is quite a small snake. I'd say he's maybe like 4.5, 5 feet long, including his tail. And this is a huge amount of space for him. You know, maybe eventually I could add some more structure in there so we can utilize that bottom half a little bit more. But for now, I think I'm happy with it. And I'll just go through the lighting on his enclosure because it's the same on all of the enclosures. We have a UVB tube at the back. This is a Faunalux 20-watt bulb. If you don't know what Faunalux is, I'll put a link in the description. They're a new brand producing bulbs that produce a ton of UVA, which is something that the reptiles can see. Typically, our lighting's we're lacking UVA, so that's what that's for. There's this halogen basking bulb. And then I also have some visible LEDs that just light up the enclosure as well, help out with the plant growth. So that is the same kind of lighting arrangement that I have for all 4 enclosures. So next up, we have my Japanese rat snake. So this is a custom enclosure that I built out of some old windows. I've used it for several different species of animals at this point, but currently it's being used for the Japanese rat snake. Can we find him? No, he's hidden. So I'll throw some B-roll in of him. This enclosure has the grass. So for those of you that saw me build, I had initially a ton of grass in here, and I always get messages about this grass specifically. How's the grass doing? What's the update with it? So I let the grass get really long initially, and then I kind of stopped misting it regularly, so the grass died. And this is what it looks like when it's dead. It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't look bad. It just looks like dead grass. Recently, I rehooked up the misting system, and that allowed the grass to come back. It actually was just dormant, so it wasn't technically dead, I guess, and it came back sort of full force. And then I had a fungus gnat breakout. So only about a week ago, I've turned off the misting system, and you can already see the grass is just starting to die off. That's just the nature of this. So I'm going to turn the misting system off for another maybe week or so to try to clean up that outbreak, and then I'll turn it back on, and I assume some grass should be back. I'll post a picture from a few weeks ago where the grass looked a little bit thicker, but I'm fine with letting them die now because I'd rather the fungus gnats be dead and let the grass grow back. This enclosure has been working out really well. The animal has been enjoying it. The issue being the way I built these hides and these tunnels are like fixed into this Like this, I cannot get into this tunnel, and of course the snake will hide in there. So if I ever want to remove this snake, I don't exactly know how I'm going to do it, and that is relevant for the next enclosure we're going to look at as well. So anyway, same lighting system that we have at the top here, and yeah, the animal's doing well. I'll throw some B-roll of him in there in a second. Okay, so next up we have my other 6-foot enclosure by 3 feet tall by 2 feet wide. And this is for my dwarf boa, or my Central American boa, Winston. Well, I think the only animal that actually has a name in my room. And there he is hanging out. So again, a very similar setup to my jungle carpet python enclosure. I have a couple hides on the bottom, a bunch of leaf litter and whatnot. I have one of those hides that I've hid with some oak bark, and then some live plants that have over the years survived his trampling, thankfully. And again, this is a nice calm animal. I've had him for about 10 years now, and he's enjoying life. Let's take a closer look at him. So this is actually a hybrid boa. He is a Boa Imperator Boa Sigma hybrid. And that hybridization between those two, that pair, was done before that species was split. So this is one of those examples where, you know, he wasn't a hybrid when he was initially bred, and now that things have been reclassified, he is technically a hybrid. So this is essentially a Colombian boa, like what you would see in Colombia, Boa Imperator, with a Sonoran desert boa. And again, that's relevant because he's an animal that I'm allowed to keep because he stays a little bit smaller. And we'll talk about those other two that I had to move on in a second, that you're probably understanding why that might be, because these are, again, two quite small snakes, including the rat snake above. They are small. And finally, the OG of the entire reptile room, my Crested Gecko, in this 3x2x2. He's actually out right now, which is, one second. Let's open this up so you can actually see him. It's hard to see his face, but this is an animal that I've had since 2007, and he hatched in 2005. So this is a 20-year-old Crested Gecko, and I think it's just so relevant to point that out because they can kind of be, you know, on the whim birthday gifts and presents for kids and whatnot. But this is an animal that I had when I was in high school. I've now graduated university, have a career, have kids and a wife, and this animal is still with me. So that just puts into perspective how long these animals live. And he shows no signs of slowing down. I imagine that he'll only have a few more years at kind of at max, but who knows? You never know. Maybe he'll live another 10 years. I don't know. Again, lighting, same system. He's got a UVA bulb, a UVB bulb, and he also has a halogen, although he doesn't have an additional visible light bulb for the plants, just because I didn't think he necessarily wanted that super bright light. And the enclosure as set up now is sort of, you know, has some bright light at the top, but then also filters down to pretty much darkness at the bottom, which is similar to what you might see in the wild. Okay, and lastly for reptile enclosures is this 4x3x2. Many of you who follow the channel will recognize this as my jungle carpet python enclosure, although he has been moved down to this enclosure as we already have seen. So now this enclosure is actually empty and it's been revamped. I've added some new things. We'll take a closer look in a second. So the enclosure itself is set up very similarly that it was with the carpet python. There's new plants in here that I've just planted. That's why everything's small. And I do have some grass and potentially some wildflowers that I've planted in here that are hopefully going to grow as well. We'll see how this works. Again, I'm kind of in the midst of getting rid of some fungus gnats. So that's why I have all these sticky traps in here. Again, there's no animal in here. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks that the grass establishes itself and I can go back to regular misting and whatnot and not have to worry about the gnats. But you know, that's typically what happens when you reset up things. But anyway, the enclosure is set up very similar. I did add a few more kind of branches in there as well. And of course the grass and a little bit of extra leaf litter. But what I'm most excited about is on this side. So for those of you who remember, I built this enclosure. We have two different sky hides and a few actually arboreal water sources as well. There's one right there and then one on this side right there. But what I'm most excited about is this corner. And to me, this just looks like something you would find in an eastern deciduous forest in the fall. This is just a bunch of piled up oak bark. And actually below this substrate is a Reptile Basics hide, one of those PVC hides that I've cut an additional entrance on. So underneath the soil is a Reptile Basics hide with two PVC tubes that lead to it at a 90-degree angle. And one entrance is right there. So this, even though you can hardly see, that is actually a PVC tube with a piece of bark on top of it. And then there's another one on this side. I don't know how well you can see that, but that's another entrance. So you have two tubes that are running to this hide that's in the corner underneath soil, and then a bunch of oak bark stacked on top of each other. And each one's been stacked in a way that allows a gap between. So this is exactly where you would find a snake outside in the wild. There's a ton of different hides that they can wedge themselves in between. And it's basically a log pile, in other words. So I just love the way it turned out. I think it's a smarter way of building a hide, where this is fixed in here. Like, I cannot pull this hide out at all. So everything is stuck, and to get the snake out is going to be hard. So it's not convenient. Where this one, I would have to destroy what I've built, but it could be pulled out without actually having to like tear things off the wall. It's just in there. So my idea is that I will move the rat snake, the Japanese rat snake, into this enclosure, and that'll be his new space once the grass kind of settles in, and once I figure out a way to get him out of there. This will be his new home, and I think he's going to absolutely love this cork pile, or this bark pile of wood, as well as all this additional climbing space and climbing branches and whatnot. So I'm very looking forward to that. And then this will be my empty enclosure that I'll have left, that I'll leave empty for a while and eventually put something in it. Okay, last but not least are the two tarantula enclosures that I also recently just redid this weekend. So these were actually little acrylic tubes that I bought off of Temu. So these are 15 inches long by, I think maybe 8 by 8, something along those lines. And they are similar to what you would find maybe like tarantula cribs, but the quality is much, much worse. They are very flimsy. And when I put this much soil and rock and things in them and started carrying them, I was actually concerned that the glue was going to give out and they were going to blow out the bottom. So, they were very cheap, but are they going to last long term? Probably not, but they're working for now. So this is my Brachypelma hamorii. And this is his enclosure, a bunch of leaf litter, kind of sandy, rocky substrate with another cork hide under there. He hasn't used it, or he or she hasn't used it a ton. I'm hoping they'll actually start to use it more frequently. One big change that I've recently done with my tarantulas is I have this Zoomed dome. There is a Phonolux 20 watt bulb in there, as well as I think a 50 watt halogen on the other side. And I know using lighting for tarantulas is somewhat unconventional, but I have found that since I moved, this basement was a little cold, and they were actually hugging the wall that was closest to my space heater down here. And so I decided, maybe I should try giving them some external heat. And suddenly they were both basking under the bulb all the time, which was pretty fascinating. So I think it's been benefit for them. Of course, adding the visible light was new as well. And so far they're adjusting fine. And the second spider I have, scared the Brachypelma. The second one I have is a Bumba horrida. So I think it's like the Brazilian red-headed tarantula. You can see its legs right there just sticking out from that tube. Can I get that to focus? It's tough. I will try to get some B-roll of this animal as well. But very similar setup. Again, lots of kind of rocky cork substrate, as well as a very, very deep substrate with a lot of moisture that's down near the bottom. And what's cool about this one is this a species that tends to burrow? At least I've found this one burrows. So I've added this cork tube right across, or piece of cork right across the top. So it should be able to safely burrow without it collapsing on itself from one end of the enclosure to the other, all the way to the back. So I would anticipate that in a few months I start to see, tunnels from one end to the other. Of course, this animal's only been in here for a week or so, so we'll have to give it some time to settle in and start to do its thing. And that is the spiders. All right, so that is the full tour. We have just the 3 snakes, the Japanese rat snake, the jungle carpet python, and the boa, an empty enclosure, a crested, another fungus gnat flying around, the crested gecko, and then the 2 tarantulas. And that is where the room is sitting right now, and I don't plan on expanding it really anytime soon. Of course, the empty enclosure will likely be filled at some point, but for now, that is where things are going to stabilize, and I can kind of get used to this new room and then get used to, getting the podcast out again and continuing to work on this channel. So if you have been a follower for a long time, you probably already realized that my Brazilian rainbow boa and my other Colombian boa are both missing from the room. And so that's why animals have been moved around, and the carpet python got an expansion because when I got rid of one of those animals, there was an empty 6 foot enclosure, and that's what was allowed me to move him into there. So why did I have to get rid of these 2 animals? Well, I had a kind of job change. My job's similar, but the location basically changed. And my family and I decided that it was best to move to get closer to work because I was spending lots of time in the car. And it was just that extra, half an hour or more every day really adds up that it would have been, and sometimes even more actually, sometimes more like an hour extra time in the car. It made more sense to move to a closer location to workplace, which meant I was now moving into a city with bylaws, and you cannot keep animals over 2 meters long in the city that I live in, Manitoba. So in boa species, boa or python species, anything that's reaching over 2 meters, which is 6.5 feet, is not allowed to be kept. And if you are caught with these animals, like, you're harboring a prohibited animal, there's a fine. I think it's like a $500 or $1,000 fine per animal. And I assume the animal, they probably attempt to rehome it, but there's also a chance that the animal gets, euthanized. So that's not ideal either. So in reality, could I have kept those 2 animals and secretly kept them here? Probably no one would have known, and I probably never would have got in trouble for it. But at the same time, I had to think, is it the right thing to do for the animal? Is it the right thing to risk the animal potentially being confiscated? I'm somewhat of a public figure. People can figure out where I live. I talk about where I live all the time, so that's not a mystery. So to me, it just didn't really make sense to risk both having this huge fine, risk the animal ending up in some random home that I wasn't able to help with, or also maybe potentially being euthanized. So those 2 animals, the rainbow boa and the boa, who are both well over 6 feet and easily kind of that 6.5 foot, 2 meter mark, were not legal here. And unfortunately, my other boa, which is kind of a dwarf species of boa, he's again 10 years old, he's 5 feet long, he's never going to hit that. And same with the jungle carpet python, is another small species, he is small, he will not get anywhere near 2 meters. So the other 2 were already exceeded that, so I had to make that decision. So thankfully, there's a great community of reptile keepers here in Manitoba, and one of them, my boa, went to Curtis over at Fraser Reptiles. You can find him on Facebook and probably Instagram as well. And he has a great collection, but he also does lots of kind of interaction stuff with education and works with kids. And because that specific boa is so docile and so calm, it sort of fit super well into the program that he already had to help people, to educate people on these animals. And she's a larger snake, so she's slightly impressive, but she's also super calm, and she doesn't do the normal boa thing that like kind of hog ties your wrists or things along those lines. She's just so flaccid and relaxed that she's a perfect animal for that. And so I was really happy to have her go there. I sent her with the enclosure and all the lighting and everything as well. And I think she's doing totally fine there. And then the second animal, the rainbow boa, went over to Chris Biggs. So for those of you may have seen the Mad Aquarist on YouTube, but he also recently started a new channel called Realm Natura, where he is basically creating his own personal zoo. He built a giant outbuilding, like a shop, and he has a select few animals that are going in there with these nice, beautiful enclosures. I just went there this week to drop the animal off, and it's just an amazing place. He's doing exactly what every reptile keeper wish they could do if they had unlimited funds and unlimited. Not saying he has unlimited funds, but it sort of seems like that when you walk there. It's this huge thing. If you had unlimited space and unlimited funds, we would all be doing what Chris is doing or Biggs is doing out there. So I was super. He had already had kind of he wanted to have a rainbow boa into that system. So she was a perfect fit for him, and she's already there, and she's kind of settling in a temporary enclosure, and then she's going to get her own enclosure at this basically personal zoo. So I couldn't be happier with where the animals ended up. But again, it's one of those things where I never thought that I would get rid of an animal, but also never thought that my living condition or my living situation would change to the point where I wouldn't be allowed to keep them. So I don't know. You'd have to let me know. What would you do? Would you have secretly kept the animals without not telling anybody and just risking it, assuming that you're probably going to be fine, or would you decide to move them along? And I guess I should say, I didn't sell the animals. I wasn't making money off them. I just wanted to find good homes, and I gave them to these people because I could have sold them and made lots of money because the enclosures were nice and whatnot, but it just didn't make sense to do that. So I think that's everything. I think I've caught you guys up. New move. This is where we are. Let me know what you think of the enclosures. Hopefully you like them. Once I have that rat snake enclosure empty, maybe you can give me some ideas of what you might think could go in there. More another small species of colubrid or something. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, if you want to have a whole full story of more of my background, make sure you tune into Adam's podcast, The Expert and the Idiot. In January, we go into a lot more details with some of the controversial stuff that's happened around me and surrounding the show as well, which I think some of you may appreciate hearing about that as well. And until the next episode of the podcast, I will catch you then. Like I said, we're going to start ramping up production again, and it won't be long before there's, every episode somewhere between every 7 to 14 days, there'll be a new episode coming out for you guys. And yeah, so anyway, have a great day. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.